They say the world grows quiet before a life changes. And that evening, silence stretched across the dusty Montana street like a sheet pulled over a body. The sun sagged low, leaking copper light along the horizon, and wind swept through town carrying a hush that belonged in churches, not saloons. Dust drifted like pale ghosts, brushing against boots, barrels, rocking chairs, things that never learned how to move on their own. Lydia Quinn stood in the middle of it, still as a fence post, her hands folded gently at her waist. 19 years old, blind since a fever stole the world from her at 8, yet somehow she carried herself like someone who could still see the sky, back straight, chin lifted, listening to the wind like it had secrets only she could hear. She wore a faded calico dress, hem-frayed, sewn too many times by hands running out of excuses. Her hair, dark as burnt wheat, fell in loose waves that never learned discipline. She wasn't trembling, though the situation begged for it. Lydia didn't tremble in front of people. She saved that for behind barn doors, where no one could misinterpret it as weakness. Around her, the town gathered, not in cruelty, but in that lazy Western way where nothing better was happening, so they watched. Men leaned on hitching posts. Women pretended to sweep porches. Children pressed their faces against glass windows, learning too early how cheap a life could seem. A stray dog whined. The piano inside Doyle's saloon stopped mid-song. Even the wind slowed. Standing beside Lydia was Elias Quinn, her older brother, 27, boots worn to their soles, eyes hollowed out from too many years trying to outrun hunger and losing every time. He cleared his throat, failing at dignity, and looked out over the crowd with a shame-strangled expression. She can cook, clean, he said, voice cracking. Ain't afraid of work. Just needs a good home. He paused. And someone patient. Someone snorted. Another shifted with discomfort. But no one stepped forward. Elias continued, softer now, almost begging, Just $1. Enough to get us to Butte. There's mining work there. I swear it. His hand trembled around the crumpled paper in his fist. Custodial rights, if anyone cared enough to read them. Lydia didn't need eyes to know what was happening. The air had weight, the kind that came from judgment and witnessing. She could hear men breathing through their noses, hear distant horses flicking their tails, hear the scrape of shame in her brother's voice. She lifted her face slightly, not toward a direction, just toward the world. Elias, she said softly, it's all right. But it wasn't. And they both knew it. Across the street, leaning against the fence outside the livery stable, stood Calder Boone, the man townsfolk called the Silent Cowboy. Tall, broad-shouldered, weathered like a map left in the rain. His hat shadowed eyes that had seen too much, perhaps too long ago. He rarely spoke, not because he couldn't, but because doing so felt like reopening old wounds. A scar cut across his jaw, thin and pale, like a sentence he never finished. If the crowd was a river of noise, Calder was the stone refusing to be pushed along. His gaze stayed fixed on Lydia, not with pity, not with fascination, just a steady recognition, as if he'd seen a version of her before, somewhere far from here. Sheriff Amos Granger sauntered forward then, gut first, badge glinting like a lie in the fading sun. He carried a silver dollar between two fingers, spinning it casually, letting it catch light like it was some holy artifact. Well, Granger said, voice dipped in whiskey, seems we got ourselves a bargain. Nobody laughed, but nobody objected either. Elias swallowed, eyes darting toward Lydia, but she didn't turn toward him. She simply waited, steady and unbearably quiet, hands still folded, like she had learned long ago that the world listened better when she didn't speak. Granger flipped the dollar into the dirt. It landed with a dull thud, sinking halfway into the dry earth. Payment rendered, he declared. Someone whispered, Lord help her. Someone else answered, Lord's been gone a while. Elias crouched, picked up the dollar like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and tucked it deep into his pocket, embarrassed, relieved, destroyed. He touched Lydia's arm, barely grazing it. I'm sorry, he whispered. It was the kind of sorry that didn't ask forgiveness, just hoped for it. Then he walked away. Bootsteps faded. Silence grew heavier. The town exhaled, like a debt paid. Lydia stood in the street as if rooted, uncertain which direction abandonment traveled. She listened for her brother's footsteps long after they disappeared. Her breath stayed calm, but her fingers curled slightly, almost imperceptibly, mourning, quietly. No one stepped toward her. No one offered guidance. No one claimed responsibility. Because a blind girl sold for $1 did not belong to anyone, not even herself. Until Boots approached, slow, grounded, respectful. Not the sheriff's arrogant stomp. Not Elias's desperate shuffle. Something steadier, measured, human. Lydia turned her head toward the sound, though she couldn't place it. But she felt warmth, a presence without threat, like a hearth fire on a winter morning. A calloused hand reached out, paused, waited. Not grabbing. Not demanding. Inviting. Calder Boone didn't speak. He simply let the silence become a question. Lydia lifted her hand, searching through air until she found his. His palm was warm, rough, steady, like a man who had carried both saddles and grief. The moment their hands met, the wind rose again, not sharply, but gently, like relief. Where are we going?" Lydia asked, voice thin but unbroken. Calder finally spoke, low, gravel-soft, carrying a lifetime in 6 words. "Someplace they can't measure you. No sermon. No promise. Just truth." And beneath that hollow sky, Lydia Quinn took her first step toward a life not priced by a coin. The road out of town stretched long and empty, like a sentence no one wanted to finish. Calder Boone didn't lead Lydia quickly. He matched her stride, step for step, letting the silence guide them instead of urgency. Horses breathed steadily behind them, hooves thudding against dirt like a quiet heartbeat. Somewhere far off, a hawk cut through the evening sky, unseen but unmistakable. Lydia tilted her head, listening. Not to predict danger, just to understand the shape of the world she was walking into. "Is it far?" she asked. Calder's answer came after a gentle pause, like he weighed every word before releasing it. "Far enough," he murmured, "but close to what matters." She didn't know what that meant, but she held onto it like a borrowed coat against winter. The wind softened as they left town behind, carrying fewer voices, fewer judgments. Lydia could almost feel the shift in the air, like stepping out of a crowded room into a wide open field. For the first time that day, she inhaled without hesitation. When they reached the ranch, Lydia sensed it before she stood in front of it, wood settling with age, wind threading through broken fence rails, the faint creak of a weathered windmill keeping its ancient promise. She reached out, fingertips grazing the wooden gate, feeling its grooves, its scars. "This yours?" she asked. Calder didn't say yes. He said, "It's what's left." Something inside her recognized that answer, loss speaking through ownership. He guided her through the yard, narrating gently, fence to the left, barn ahead, cottonwood to the right whose branches hummed with resting birds. Lydia paused beneath that tree, listening to the leaves swaying like cautious applause. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of cedar, saddle soap, and coffee long since cooled. She ran her fingers along a wooden table, solid, hand-built, slightly uneven. Not perfect. Not polished. Honored by use. Calder set a tin cup in her hands, warm enough to comfort, not burn. She brought it to her lips, coffee, but with a hint of honey. "For you," he said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a welcome. It was a beginning. Lydia sat, carefully folding her hands. "You don't have to keep me." Calder leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, not defensive, just thinking. "Maybe not," he said softly. "But maybe someone should." She felt those words ripple through her like the first raindrop of a coming storm, gentle but impossible to ignore. For a while, they didn't speak. Not out of awkwardness, out of mutual reverence for quiet. Morning arrived pale and forgiving. Lydia woke not to shouting or rummaging or slammed doors, but to the rustle of hay being moved and the low murmur of Calder reassuring his horse. She sat up slowly, letting the sun press its warmth onto her face through the thin window curtain. She followed the sounds outside, using her hand to trail along the cabin wall. Calder noticed, walked toward her without urgency, and placed her palm on the porch railing, wide, smooth, dependable. "Sun's coming up," he told her. Lydia smiled, the kind of smile that didn't require sight. "Tell me what it looks like." Calder swallowed, almost startled that she trusted him with something so tender. After a long breath, he spoke. "Like the world forgot it was cruel for a minute." She didn't ask for more. That was enough. They developed a rhythm, not fast, not forced. Calder described the world in textures and temperatures. Lydia named sounds he hadn't noticed in years: crickets with uneven chirps, the distant echo of a woodpecker, the soft rattle of wind in sagebrush. He showed her how many steps led to the barn, how the porch dipped slightly near the far post. She memorized it all, not out of fear, but because belonging felt like a map worth learning. One afternoon, she found the courage to ask, "Do people come by much?" Calder didn't sugarcoat. "They will now." And he was right. Word had spread fast, quicker than wildfire, carried by mouths that never paid for honesty. Rook Mercer was first, a ranch foreman whose voice always sounded like it wanted to be louder than it was. He rode up, boots hitting the ground too confidently, spurs jangling like punctuation. "So it's true," he drawled. "You bought yourself company." Calder stepped forward, not threatening, just present. "She's not property," he said quietly. Rook let out a slow whistle. "Town don't see it that way. Sheriff neither." Lydia stood behind the half-open door, hands pressed to the frame, not hiding, just steadying herself. She could feel the judgment in the air, thick enough to taste, like iron and dust. Rook mounted his horse, spit into the dirt, and rode off. Calder didn't chase him, didn't curse, didn't slam anything. He just exhaled, a tired, disappointed sound. Lydia stepped outside. "I'm causing trouble." Calder shook his head. "Trouble was already here. You just made folks notice it." Those words wrapped around her like a blanket, unexpected, needed, frighteningly gentle. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, she listening to the world breathe, he polishing his saddle, pretending not to watch her. Their silences weren't empty. They were a conversation spoken in another language. Once, Calder placed a smooth river stone in her hand, flat, warm from the sun. "Found it near the creek," he said. Lydia traced its shape slowly. "Why give it to me?" He hesitated. "Because someone should give you things without asking anything back." Her throat tightened. She didn't thank him. Gratitude felt too small. But kindness has a way of drawing attention, especially in towns that worship scarcity more than grace. Sheriff Granger visited next. Horse heavy, voice heavier. "You'll need paperwork, Boone," he said. "Can't just take a girl someone sold." Calder didn't flinch. "I didn't take her. I offered a place to stay." Granger smirked, like mercy was a joke he'd heard too many times. "Town's talking. And talk becomes law if no one stops it." When he left, dust rose behind him like a warning. Lydia stood nearby, hands curled around themselves. "I don't want to be a burden." Calder turned toward her, not abruptly, not pitying, just certain. "You're not weight," he said. "You're proof I still know how to carry something right." The world paused, just long enough for hope to breathe. That night, Lydia sat on the porch, knees tucked beneath her, listening to the cottonwood sway. Calder sat beside her, close enough she could feel his presence, far enough she could choose. "Do you ever get tired of being silent?" she asked gently. Calder thought for a long moment. "Silence kept me alive once," he said. Then softer, "But lately, it feels less like armor, and more like lonely." Lydia reached out, not searching, just offering. Calder placed his hand in hers, steady and deliberate. No promises. No claims. Just a shared understanding. Loneliness was lighter when carried by two. And beneath that quiet western sky, something small and sacred began. Not love, not yet, but the tender possibility of it. The storm didn't arrive with lightning, just boots. 3 pairs, marching across the yard with the confidence of men who believed no one would question them. Lydia heard them before Calder did, footsteps sharp, rhythm clipped, anger disguised as authority. She was sitting on the porch, shelling peas into a tin bowl, when the ground beneath her began to vibrate. Calder stepped outside, wiping his hands on a work rag. His shoulders stiffened, not in fear, but in recognition. Sheriff Amos Granger stood at the center, badge gleaming like a blade. On his left was Rook Mercer, face smug and entertained, and on his right, Elias Quinn. Lydia froze at the sound of her brother's breathing. It hadn't changed, still uneven, still frantic, still apologetic. "Boone," Granger said, voice slick as oil. "We got business." Calder didn't move. "You picked a loud way to handle it." Granger held up a folded paper. "Town council says the transaction wasn't lawful. Girl goes back to her next of kin until we sort this out." Lydia's pulse fluttered like a trapped sparrow. Next of kin. The phrase tasted like a cage. Elias spoke then, voice trembling. "Lydia, I came to bring you home." The word home wobbled in the air, unstable and unconvincing. Calder's jaw tightened, but he didn't step between them, didn't clench his fists, didn't escalate the moment into violence. He simply breathed, slow and steady. Lydia stood, placing the pea bowl down gently, the tiny clicks echoing like clock hands. "I'm not property," she said softly. Granger shrugged. "Never said you were. But you ain't staying here." Calder's voice dropped to something quieter, heavier. "She chooses." Rook laughed, short and sharp. "She can't even see what she's choosing." That was the spark. Not cruelty, but dismissal. Lydia didn't flinch, didn't bow her head. She lifted her chin, face turned toward the wind like it was guiding her back to herself. "I see more than most," she whispered. The yard fell still. Even the cottonwood stopped rustling, as if the world was leaning in. Elias took a hesitant step. "LYD. I didn't know what else to do. We were starving." "I know," she said gently, not letting him drown in guilt. "But selling me didn't fix it." Elias broke then, shoulders collapsing, breath scraping the edges of regret. He wasn't a villain, just a man who ran out of options and chose the worst one. Granger cleared his throat, impatient with humanity. "Enough sentiment. She's coming with us." Calder's hand twitched, not toward his gun, but toward Lydia, instinctive, protective. But he didn't reach. He always waited for permission. Lydia stepped forward, not toward Granger, not toward safety, but toward truth. Her voice carried like a hymn spoken into an empty church. "I wasn't saved when he took my hand. I was saved when he didn't make decisions for me." Rook scoffed, but quieter now. She continued, stronger, "I am not luggage to be claimed. I am not a debt. I am not a bargain." Elias covered his face, shame leaking through his fingers. Lydia turned toward him, eyes unfocused, but attention razor-sharp. "I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean return." A murmur rippled across the yard. Calder hadn't noticed the gathering behind the sheriff. Maeve Doyle from a saloon stood near the fence, apron still on, breath held. Behind her, the blacksmith, a schoolteacher, a ranch hand. Half the town had followed, drawn by rumor or conscience. Maeve stepped forward. "Girl's got a right to stay where she's treated like a human being." Others nodded, quiet, tentative, but undeniable. Rook shifted nervously. The sheriff looked around, calculating, not morally, but politically. Calder still hadn't moved. He knew this wasn't his fight to win. It belonged to Lydia. Lydia took another breath, steady as sunrise. "I choose here." 4 words, no theatrics, no pleading, no trembling. Just truth. Granger stared at her, then at the crowd, realizing this was no longer about law, it was about what people would tolerate. And suddenly, he didn't have enough men. He lowered the paper. "Fine. But don't expect protection when trouble comes." Calder finally spoke, voice like steady rain. "Trouble already did. No anger. No triumph. Just fact." The sheriff mounted his horse, Rook following reluctantly. Elias remained, unable to move, drowning in a sorrow that couldn't be undone. Lydia reached out. Calder stepped aside, letting her walk to her brother alone. Elias caught her hands like they were the last warm thing in the world. "I'm sorry," he choked. "I didn't know how to keep you." Lydia squeezed gently. "You don't have to keep me. Just remember me." He nodded, broken and lighter at the same time. When he finally left, the yard breathed again. The townsfolk drifted away, no applause, no celebration, just quiet respect. A lesson learned in silence. Calder approached Lydia, slow enough for her to sense him coming. He didn't touch her. Just stood close enough that she could feel his certainty. "You sure?" he asked softly. She turned her face toward him, smiling, not out of gratitude, but belonging. "I've never been more sure." And for the first time, Calder allowed himself a small, unguarded smile, the kind that came from letting the world back in. They sat on the porch as the sun lowered, painting the land in colors Lydia couldn't see but could feel, warmth on her cheeks, wind shifting, earth settling. Calder placed her hand on the railing, anchoring her to the place she chose, not the one chosen for her. "Tell me," she whispered, "what does the sky look like?" Calder looked out, eyes softened by new beginnings. "Like it finally remembered how to hope." Lydia let the words sink in, slow, sacred. She didn't need the sky to see the future. She could hear it in his voice, feel it in the stillness between them. Not a rescue. Not a romance forced by circumstance. Just two lives walking parallel long enough to become a path. And as dusk descended, the world no longer felt hollow. It felt earned. Final reflective paragraph, addressing the reader. Maybe you've never been sold, abandoned, or priced, but life has a way of convincing us we're worth less than we are. Yet somewhere out there, a hand waits, not to claim you, not to fix you, but to walk beside you until the world feels gentle again. So if you're standing in your own dust-covered street, believing you are alone, remember Lydia. Remember the girl who could not see the sky but chose her place beneath it anyway. Hope doesn't arrive loud. It arrives quietly, like footsteps stopping beside you, asking nothing, except that you stay.